3 weeks from today. It will be the day after. And I will, God willing, be having a conversation with Mark Halperin, as I do every Wednesday in the second hour of the program. And we will be parsing what we learned the night before. Will we know who won? I don't know if we'll know. I think I know where Mark believes the race stands, because today in his Wide World of News, he quotes a Bill Galston column from the Wall Street Journal. Quote, Ms. Harris's national support peaked in the week following her September 10 debate with Donald Trump, but has since fallen back. Polling aggregates from Real Clear Politics 538 and the New York Times now agree that the former president is leading in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. If they're right, the odds are rising that Ms. Harris must sweep the blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, to score a narrow victory. During the past few weeks, however, Mr. Trump has cut into Ms. Harris's lead in all these states. Even if there aren't any October surprises, many factors could influence the outcome. These include turnout, a possible undercount of Trump supporters, the effect of the Trump campaign's advertising blitz against Harris on the transgender issue, and the movements of last-minute swing voters. Any of these known unknowns could prove decisive. A reminder that voters, not pundits, decide elections. This is Mark Halperin. So, Mark, you thought that the Galston piece in the Wall Street Journal summed up where we are.
Yeah, I'm not rooting for Donald Trump to win or predicting he'll win. And I'm not at all closing out the possibility that Kamala Harris will win, and maybe even win easily. That's how unsettled everything is. But I think Bill Galston, in framing the race that way, is keying off of what he and I are both hearing privately from Democrats, and something that you and I discussed more than a month ago based on Trump world, which is Kamala Harris maybe back where Joe Biden was before the debate, where the 4 Sunbelt states are unlikely going to provide her electoral votes to win. And she does need to win the 3, what I like to call Great Lakes states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, as well as Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, giving her potentially one single path to exactly 270 electoral votes. No margin of error. A situation no one has ever won the White House, where they basically have one electoral college path. And in the face of what you and I have discussed many times, which is Donald Trump's enduring and surprising to some strength in Pennsylvania. Why is Kamala Harris continuing to fight for the Sunbelt states? Because there are only 7 states. It's the smallest battlefield we've had in our lifetime of how many states are truly in play. And she's got all the money in the world. And she has reason to believe that she could win, I believe, with the possible exception of Arizona, any of the 7 states. Maybe 6 of the 7, maybe all 7. Maybe Arizona would be a surprise for a variety of reasons you could cite. But what Bill Galston is saying there, and I know Bill well enough to know that he writes with precision, is some Democrats are now worried that she's behind and that her path to victory depends on something like an October surprise or something outside what we can see currently before us.
Is the appearance with Bret Baier today a tell of sorts? Is that her exhibiting and her campaign exhibiting confidence or trepidation?
I think they're dealing with the reality that they have a lot of demographic groups to do better with. We've seen, I think, a bigger tell is she's spending a lot of 3 or 4 days here in the end trying to shore up her support amongst Black men. I think that's an extraordinary tell. Again, it doesn't mean she'll lose, but it does suggest a level of weakness that the Biden-Harris campaign has been trying to deal with for over a year. I think that the thought of this morning, and I'm still sort of noodling on it. I think one of the challenges she has right now is she's simultaneously trying to shore up the base and switch to 2 messages that are seemingly related, but I think actually work at cross purposes for some voters. One is she's going to bring the country together and Trump's going to divide us. So when she has an event today in Pennsylvania with Adam Kinzinger and other Republicans, it's to say Trump's going to subject the country, consign the country to 4 more years of division. I'm a uniter. But then for some voters, when they're listening to her, they hear her say she's open to reparations for the descendants of slaves. They hear her say she'd eliminate the filibuster to pass reproductive freedom legislation. So, what is it about her record or her rhetoric that gives people confidence? If you want to unite her, she's the better choice. I think that's the challenge. I think going on Brett's show is a risk, and like most risks in politics, high risk, high reward. If she does well, then I think it's really important to her. Not so much to win over Fox voters, viewers, although there are plenty of people who watch Fox who are independents and undecided. But I think it's to demonstrate a fluidity with the concept of what it means to be president and a confidence that she can take on all comers. And I think if she does well, I think it'll be a great move. Brett is formidable, and I'll be watching this event with extraordinary interest.
I wonder if it was always part of the plan that the rollout would be controlled, that there would be this bubble wrap approach to the media, that there would be The View, and there would be Howard Stern, and there would be Colbert. And ultimately, then, in the closing days of the campaign, she would expand that circle, having gained her sea legs. Or, going back to where my question was, is it a departure because the internal polls of the Harris campaign support the concern among Democrats?
Well, I don't know factually, but just piecing things together, they're not in as strong a position as they'd hoped to be, which suggests they need to try something different. And they have switched to a message of Trump is unhinged and January 6th was really bad. And those are points of view that have resonance for tens of millions of Americans, but they're not what you started at running on. And so if you're trying to choose based on piecing things together, are the message changes and the decision to do Fox part of a long-term plan or adapting to an environment that's unfavorable? It appears to be the latter. It appears to be the latter.
Mark, there's one metric that I have at the top of my list. I wonder if you have something similar in your head that you think is indicative of where we are. And it's this. You and I are having this conversation on October 16. So this data is 6 days old, but it probably still holds when I say that on October 10 of this year in the national poll, Kamala Harris was ahead of Donald Trump by 2 points. No, we don't elect nationally, but it's indicative of what's going on. In 2016, on that same day, October 10, Hillary was up 6. She ended up winning the national survey, the national vote, by 2 points. On October 10 of 2020, I'm doing this from memory, but I know it's correct, Biden was up 10, and he ended up winning by 4. The point being that in both 2016 and in 2020, there was a significant hidden vote for Trump. The pollsters say they've figured it out. But if we see anything like that in this cycle, then she loses. Your thought?
Yeah. So that's a 3-hour show by itself to fully unpack that. I think.
Well, I have time on my hands.
Yeah, I understand. I think
you have another two-way to get to.
Yeah, I do, but not till 7 o'clock tonight. Special time this evening, 7 p.m. Because the Harris interview unspooling at 6 Eastern. I think that there's reason to believe that the polling problem have not been fixed. There's a couple reasons to think that. We can get into it. I think that there are things about 2016 and 2020 as compared to 2024 that while learning from history is important, you could argue that this is apples to tangerines to jalapenos, that they're just not the same because of some pretty fundamental things. There are 4 reasons, at least, to think that although the polls might skew and understate Trump's support, the vastly better funded and perhaps vastly superior ground game, turn out the vote operation of the Harris campaign, the power of the abortion issue, the ceiling on long believed to exist ceiling on Trump's support, and Trump's own behavior in the last few days, and no matter how much they try to hide him in the last few weeks, will add up to a Harris victory. And as I said, maybe a substantial Harris victory. Her campaign has performed a miracle, switching at the last minute to a different candidate, bringing in new people, organizing, continuing to raise money, and in fact, raising more money, And the vice president thrust into this has turned some people in the country's impressions about her around an unprecedented degree. People see her to be more favorable than did before, though those numbers have sagged somewhat in the last few days. They've performed a miracle, and they have reasons to think they can win. But they also are going up against a situation, as you said, where Trump's support is almost certainly understated. To what degree, we don't know. And the national polls, you could say roughly, back of the envelope, unless she's got a 4-point national lead, she'll probably lose. And if she's got under a 2-point national lead, she will lose. And there's no doubt what's happened with both the national data and the data in the battleground states doesn't mean she won't win or can't win. But it does, I do think it's fair to say now that she's correct when she calls herself the underdog.
Hard to believe that it all wraps up 3 weeks from yesterday. You link today in the wide world of news. I did likewise in my own newsletter to Jeff Greenfield talking about an October surprise. Is there anything in particular that you, Mark Halperin, are looking at with regard to the remaining time on the clock?
Two things. One, I've got a new stock answer this cycle when people ask me what the October surprise will be. Ready?
Go ahead.
It's the death of one of the seven dwarfs, but we don't know which one it will be. It's a surprise. We don't know what it would be. I mean, we could make stuff up. Is something in Israel, something in Ukraine, death of somebody, right? I don't know. But what I'll say is this. This is based on my spidey sense and fingertip feel. I think it will have to be really big to make a difference in this race because the engines of fog machine and distraction and pushback on both sides are so powerful that I believe it would take something like Jim Comey did in 2016 to so dominate the news for several days that otherwise will be obscured. So we've had in the last couple of days on the right two things, one involving Kamala Harris, one involving Tim Walz, that we're setting the red side on fire. This is the October surprise. This is gonna do it. One of them turned out to be minor. One of them turned out to be completely made up. But at the highest levels of the Trump campaign, they looked at these two things and said, this is it. So I think we're going to see a lot of false flag things on both sides that are touted as the October surprise. And we all just need to relax and evaluate things as they come. But there may not be one that reaches that level. There'll certainly be a lot of false flags.
Well, and something that I would add is, as I read Jeff's piece, I was thinking to myself, many of those that he speaks of, those past October surprises, happened in an era when not so many people were voting in advance. As you well know, we had a record day in Georgia yesterday. So even if there were to be something, it's already baked in. And by the way, Mark, what do you make of that? Who would you rather be in Georgia, recognizing that yesterday they had record early voting?
Whatever is one notch or two notches below gleeful applies to Democrats in Georgia yesterday. There's no doubt that, however you slice and dice that data, that was a great sign for Democrats, that the first day of early voting had massive numbers. And so if you're Democrats today, both substantively and in terms of mood and vibes, people are very happy because Georgia may be the deciding state. People like to say Pennsylvania will be the deciding state, and certainly Pennsylvania is and will remain the most important state on the map of the seven. But if Kamala Harris loses Pennsylvania, she's got to replace it with either Georgia or North Carolina and one other of the Sun Belt states. And people in my world are of mixed views. Is Georgia a better state for her or North Carolina? There's reasons on both sides. After yesterday, I think people are going to be looking back to Georgia to say this could be the place with two Democratic senators and Joe Biden having won it before, Trump being, in some ways his most problematic state, his reconciliation with Governor Kemp notwithstanding. So great sign at a critical moment when the Blues were looking to come out of the funk that they've been in since Friday with the public polling data and some of the other things that have occurred.
You also link in the Wide World of News today. By the way, not only should you subscribe to Mark via the Wide World of News and his other projects, but make sure you're watching him in his two-way conversation. Some of the brightest political minds in the nation are there with him multiple times a day, often. And it's great coverage, and I usually watch them on a delay when it suits my schedule, and you can do likewise. You link to Matt Labash, who begins his analysis by saying, although I am a Christian, you'll forgive my unchristian language here. Donald Trump is an effing authoritarian psycho, or is at least doing a very convincing impression of one. In my first hour of today's program, while you were doing a two-way, we were parsing some of his recent dialogue, some of that harsh language, some of those threats. I continue to believe that it's part of a deliberate strategy on Trump's part to reach a portion of the electorate that might not otherwise come out to vote. I'm not defending any of it. I'm not in agreement with any of it, but I don't think it's him off script. I don't think it's him off message. I don't think that his strategists are pulling their hair out when he says these things. I think it's all part of a very deliberate approach. What does Mark Halperin think?
As is almost always the case, I agree fully with Michael Smerconish. And if you look at the coverage in the Washington Post and the New York Times, it's taking those things, which, as you said, I don't agree with. I think they coarsen our public square. I think they are manipulative and inflammatory. But we can't ignore the last 10 years and say they're unlikely to work. And we can't ignore the last 10 years and say because the Washington Post and the New York Times have turned their coverage over almost exclusively to tisk and denouncing Donald Trump in their news pages, that's going to stop Donald Trump. In fact, what we can say based on the last 10 years, unfortunately for those who think feel about Donald Trump the way Matt Labash does, is these things tend to help him, not just in the doing, as you suggested, but in the way they're covered by the dominant media. Covering Donald Trump fairly to him, fairly to his supporters, and fairly to those who believe he's the least qualified person to be president is one of the biggest challenges the American media has ever faced. And I think we will be sorely tested over the next 3 weeks as he continues to do things that don't just violate norms, but offend the moral sensibilities of tens of millions of Americans.
For a year on this program, you have spoken of the difference between those who surround him. And by the way, that team remains intact. There was some speculation a couple of weeks ago that maybe they would make some moves, but they haven't. But that he's got the most solid political team behind him, and that he seems to listen to their advice more than he did in 2016 or 2020. Is that still your impression today?
Yes, and they're cohesive for the most part. Again, there was an interlude where Corey Lewandowski was a destabilizing force. That's largely over. He listens to them, he trusts them, and they have a degree of confidence they're going to win that is higher than and qualitatively different than what existed in the Trump world in 16 and 20. They're not resting on their laurels, but part of what's informing my sense of the race is people say I'm being spun by them. I'm not. I'm listening to their explanations of why they're so confident, and it's just objectively true. There's more confidence in Mar-a-Lago right now than there is in Wilmington, and it's not because they're deluded or spinning, but because they like what they see, and that includes the performance of their candidate, a performance that again offends the sensibilities of tens of millions of Americans and the New York Times, but which in 2016 and almost in 2020 powered a guy improbably to the White House.
Okay, catch your breath, wipe the slate clean. With less than 3 weeks to go, what does Mark Halperin want to leave us with today?
Can you name the dwarves whose names don't end in Y?
No.
No.
Anything but the dwarf. Anything but the
Dan?
dwarves.
Dan, TC, dwarves whose names don't end in Y.
Doc.
Doc is one, thank you, and Bashful, thank you. I think that both of them will live, by the way. Neither of them is the October surprise. What do I want to leave with? I think that I really want the country to focus on spirited competition, but a recognition that tens of millions of people are going to be really unhappy with the outcome. Not, is it going to be Mitt Romney or Barack Obama unhappy? Not, is it going to be John McCain or Barack Obama unhappy? Not, is it going to be George Bush or Al Gore unhappy? but a fundamental rupture of people's connection to the country and to each other that I think will be sad for America at a minimum, and maybe worse. So everybody in the media, everybody in politics, citizens, let's have a great election. Let's hope for an outcome that's clear. Let's not believe conspiracy theories without doing some research. And let's really recognize that, unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of unhappy people with the outcome in a profound way. And the country needs to work together to try to minimize that, because we have a lot of challenges. And the next president, regardless of the makeup of Congress, is going to have a lot of challenges. And I hope whoever that is succeeds.
How do we find you on Two-Way?
You can go to my Twitter account, my Substack, or the Two-Way YouTube channel. And as you said, Michael, these sessions that bring together citizens from around the country with great political minds can be seen live at 9 a.m. Eastern Time and 6 p.m., although today it's 7 p.m. because of the Brett Baer interview. But then you can watch them on YouTube. They post on YouTube almost immediately after they're done. So you can watch our morning show called The Morning Meeting, which is 9 a.m. Eastern, and then you can watch my evening show, Two-Way Tonight, cleverly named. We like alliteration, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and Monday through Friday. And we'll be doing special episodes as well between now and Election Day.
I cannot imagine what will be on our list next Wednesday, but I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Mark,
Michael,
as always.
Thank you so much.